Welcome to another episode in the Criminal Calendar. Our guest today is something of a surprise. He's not a guy you'd normally find hanging with crooks and killers, especially those he just made up. Hi, Dave Berry.
Well, I do live in Miami, so I think I fit right in with crooks and criminals.
Yeah, but the ones you know are real.
Oh, that's true. That's true. Well, they're not all real. I mean, they're not. Yeah, good point.
Well, the reason that Dave is with us today is not because of his journalism and his humor columns, but because he's actually written a novel, which we're going to talk about, Big Trouble. We were just debating who posed for the cover art and whether it's really an alligator or a crocodile.
Yeah, and the weird thing is there's really neither an alligator nor a crocodile in. Well, I actually mentioned alligators one time in connection with eating golfers, something I encourage alligators to do, but I like the cover a lot. As soon as they showed it to me, I said, that's a great cover. You know, for one thing, it's kind of neat looking. For another thing, it doesn't have a picture of me doing something really stupid, which almost all of my, the covers, all my humor books, yeah, that's a good example right there.
As in Dave Berry turns 50?
Right, this is a typical cover for me. You know, there I am going, you know, or some, so I like the alligator or crocodile, whatever it may be, whether or not it has anything to do with the book.
Well, I guess
show them the toad also, Barbara.
I can do that.
Right.
And I was going to say, one of the class things about writing fiction is you get to have your cover, your picture
Look
on
at
the back of the book.
Exactly. That's a new thing.
Looking like an author. But here is the real class part of this book, is that when you divest it of the cover, not only is it green, but it has a toad.
Toad.
Who features in this book, I might add, is the enemy toad, and whose fate is important.
It's a major character of the toad in this book.
And he's actually about the last guy in the sum-up of your rather complex plot. As I remember, the enemy toad practically has the last word.
Just about, yeah.
So how did you do this? Why fiction?
Well, I work for the Miami Herald, and South Florida has a lot of writers, crime writers, Carl Hyacin, Elmore Leonard, Les Standiford, Edna Buchanan, Paul Levine, a lot of people who are writing about South Florida now and the weirdness and the crime that goes on. And a few years ago, my editor at the Miami Herald and I were talking about how could we do a story that would encompass all these writers and talk about why they're doing what they're doing. He said, rather than do just another profile, you know, a bunch of writers pose for an article, let's have them write a book. And so we hatched this idea to do a serial novel similar to what Newsday magazine did in the 60s with a mystery novel that became known as Naked Came the Stranger. And we called ours Naked Came the Manatee. And it just so happens there's a copy right there.
Pretty neat group of writers, too.
Right. It wasn't intended to be a book. It was intended to be a sequential newspaper novel every week in the Sunday magazine of the Miami Herald. And I agreed to write the first chapter, and then Tom, my editor, used that to entice other writers to write other chapters. And most of the writers I named, plus Elmore Leonard,
James
Hall, Les Standiford, and others, all agreed to write chapters, and Carl Hyacin agreed to end it and finish it up. So that was the plan. So we wrote it, and it ran in, and it was quite a popular feature in the Miami Herald. And even though as a book, as a novel, it goes all over the place, as you might expect with 13 different people writing it. But to our surprise, Putnam, the publisher, bought it, specifically an editor named Neil Nyron, who at the time was Carl Hyacin's editor. And he liked my chapter and asked me if I'd be willing to write a chapter, and write a novel, a whole novel. And I said yeah, which I'm not sure, you know, I'm not sure that I ever should have said yeah, but I started, and after I started writing the book, Big Trouble, I realized that the easiest chapter in a book, just about, is the first chapter, because, you know, you don't have to solve any problems at all. All you have to do is create problems and, you know, invent characters, which is kind of fun.
Sure, you just put it all in play.
Right. But everything you write there is going to have to ultimately mean something later on, unless it's going to be a really hideously badly plotted book. So that became the real challenge.
Hadn't you done some fiction chapters in Dave Barry in cyberspace?
I did, and that was another thing that Neil Nyren liked. I wrote, and I'm still not sure why I did that, except just to do it. I wrote a love story online that takes place online between a man and a woman, both of whom are happily married, or theoretically happily married, but who meet online and fall in love with each other, even though all they ever see is little words in a box. They don't know anything else about.
So this isn't cyber sex, this is cyber romance.
No, it was romance. It was romance, and I deliberately left it kind of vague. And some people just hated it. I mean, it was totally unlike the rest of the book. It didn't have jokes in it. And some people loved it and said, what happened? And I still get mail. In fact, the two characters in the book both have AOL sign-ons because you can create them easily and I wanted to reserve them before I wrote about them just so that nobody else could use them.
Wow.
And they still get mail. What happened? What did you two decide to do? You know. So anyway, so that I enjoyed that too, I have to say.
Now, did that come first before Naked Came the Manatee?
No, I wrote the Naked Came the Manatee chapter first.
Could I back up and ask you, was there actual, because that idea was done in the 30s by the Detection Club. Dorothy Sayers and Agatha Christie and several.
Wrote a serial novel?
They wrote 3.
Oh, I did not know that. Yeah.
Right, and it was the same principle where somebody wrote the opening chapter, got the plot and play, and then it went on from writer to writer who moved it along. I've never been clear whether there was a thread that you were going to follow all the way through, or whether the real challenge was just to pick up whatever you threw up there, and the next guy saw all the balls in the air and kept them spinning, and Lucky Carl at the end.
You know, poor Carl. Well, if I ever did this again, and I bet you the writers you named from the 30s were more careful about this. If I were to do this again, I would make rules. One of the rules would be you have to actually take the previous chapter seriously. You can't have somebody suddenly change from one thing to another. You can't introduce new characters unless there's a really compelling plot reason. Because one of the things that happened in Naked Came the Manatee is everybody has a pet character. I mean, I was the only one who wasn't a fiction writer. They all had their own pet characters, and they started putting them in. You know, suddenly new people would show up. Then they would start killing off their friends' characters or having their characters have sex with them. You know, like it became sort of this inside thing. You know, and it was fun for them, but I think it really kind of made the book almost. There's points in the book I have no idea to this day what they were trying to talk about.
Did they know who was following them? I mean, did each guy know who was going to pick up the next chapter?
I don't think it was that. It was maybe set 1 or 2 ahead. I think each writer might have known who the next one person was, but I don't think we had to line up all the way through. Elmore Leonard, who went second to last, revealed why he is the sage old guy of fiction, because he did 2 things that were very smart. He'd been handed this unbelievably like at one point early in the novel, Paul Levine puts in, I think very cleverly, you discover at the very end of the chapter that this box, which I put in the first chapter, it goes through another chapter, we don't know what's in it, and he opens up in the 3rd chapter, and it's Fidel Castro's head. And I thought it was a great, right. Oh wow, By the end of the book, there are three Fidel Castro heads, and it's still not clear that Fidel Castro is in fact dead.